Hello and welcome to PFF at Night. I am Doug Kyed, joined as always by Ari Meirov and Brad Spielberger. Ari, how are you doing today?
Doing well. We have some contract extension news today, which I'm sure Brad is happy about, and a lot more stuff to talk about as well.
We've got contract news, we've got fights, we've got everything that Brad loves, right, Brad?
Those are my two favorite topics, no question. I mean, look, people have been saying I was in LA this weekend. Chargers got the deal done with Derwin James. Is there a connection there? I don't know. Who's to say?
And I was in New England this week, so maybe there's a connection with all the fights that are brewing in Panthers Patriots training camp. You never know, but we will get into all of it. Just off the top, there has been a little bit more news regarding Deshaun Watson, that there's settlement talks ongoing between the NFL and Watson's folks. That's been reported by multiple outlets, PFN and ESPN. So we'll see what happens there. If news breaks before this show airs, then you'll probably never see me talking about this, and you'll see us instead talking about whatever settlement was reached or whatever was decided for the appeal. But let's get into other news. We mentioned contract news. Brad, take it away with this deal that Derwin James signed with the Los Angeles Chargers.
Yeah, the narrative here was always positive. It seemed like Derwin's camp and the Chargers knew something was going to eventually get done. And I think the delay, honestly, is this is a really strong deal. This is a significant step up from Minkah Fitzpatrick with the Pittsburgh Steelers. James gets $42 million in total guarantees, which is about $6 million more than Minkah Fitzpatrick. He gets $29 million in new money through the first new year of the deal, which is about $4 million more than Minkah Fitzpatrick as well. And I would say, even ignoring position markets, even ignoring maybe how a guy like Roquan Smith, a linebacker, is looking at a deal like this, the biggest takeaway may simply be Derwin James played less than 300 snaps combined in 2019 and 2020, and then, of course, returned to Derwin James form in 2021, but missed almost 2 full seasons and still becomes the highest paid player in a true market reset at safety. It's a massive win for players across the NFL, no matter where you play.
Yeah, I think we all kind of knew that this deal was going to be coming at some point, despite the fact that Derwin James was holding in. I talked to Brandon Staley at the NFL owners meetings, and he told me that he wanted to build the defense around Derwin James, similar to how teams build an offense around their quarterback. So, yeah, that gave me a little bit of intel that they plan to keep Derwin James in long term. So this was a smart deal from that perspective. Ari, what do you think of this deal?
No, we've talked about this a few times here on the show, and the entire time it felt like this thing was heading in the right direction. And Brandon Staley values Derwin James a lot. I mean, I know his position officially is a safety, but he plays all over the field, whether it's in the box, as a slot corner, a wide corner, free safety, even at times in the defensive line, he'll show up there according to our data. And it's a massive deal for him, only a 4-year deal instead of being potentially a 5 or 6 year deal for him, which would take a little bit longer, but resets the entire market, as Brad mentioned. And the concern with him, as Brad said, has never really been the play. It's been the availability. Just 5 games played in 2019 and 2020, came back last year, played at an all-pro level in his first year playing with Brandon Staley's defense. And Brandon Staley sees how valuable he is to this defense. And considering how many additions they made this offseason, from the Khalil Macks to the J.C. Jacksons, Kyle Van Noy's, and on, Sebastian Joseph Day, it was pivotal to get this deal done. So everyone on that defense is happy. He's no longer holding in. He was back on the practice field today, and it looks like the Chargers are ready to go all out here this year with that defense. And as we've mentioned a few times, a lot of Brandon Staley fingerprints on that defense. I'm really curious to see how they do this season now that everything is finally in place.
Yeah, that will be very fun to watch them. They've built around the strengths of the Brandon Staley defense. Last year was still certainly some pieces on that defense that didn't necessarily fit what Brandon Staley wanted to do. Now they brought in Khalil Mack, J.C. Jackson, kept Derwin James, built around some other pieces as well. So that will be very fun to watch in 2022. There's some more COVID news. This one was kind of interesting on Tuesday, where looked like the Seahawks quarterback competition was heating up. Drew Lock was taking first team reps in practice. I think he was the first quarterback out there for first team reps. That was pretty much the first time that had happened this summer. It was announced that Drew Lock was going to be starting the week 2 of the preseason. He was going to get that opportunity to beat out Geno Smith for the job. And then about an hour later, it was announced that Drew Lock had tested positive for COVID and that he would miss Thursday's preseason game. So definitely some unfortunate timing there for Drew Lock that could have some major repercussions on that starting quarterback battle between Drew Lock and Geno Smith. If Geno Smith can go out there and really light the world on fire, then maybe he can win that job sooner than later. But if he struggles, then maybe that still does give Drew Lock an opportunity in the third preseason game. We'll see how that all shakes out. But Ari, what do you think about the timing of all of this for Drew Lock and the Seahawks?
Yeah, very, very unfortunate timing for him. And again, it's just a reminder to everyone that COVID is still sort of a thing here this season, even though the NFL is not testing every player every single day. If you feel some symptoms, you self-report yourself, you take a test, you're positive. Under the current rules following the CDC guidelines, you must isolate for a minimum of 5 days. That means he's out for Thursday night's game against the Bears, which is actually in primetime on ESPN. So Geno Smith is once again going to start. He started the last preseason game against Pittsburgh. He'll get this start as well. I know Pete Carroll has been saying that Geno Smith is in the lead, but I believe, Doug, you've mentioned this as well. It just felt like at some point they're in a transition just to Drew Lock, just based off the upside. And if things don't go well, eventually when the season starts, you could always go back to Geno Smith. This might throw a wrench into everything because their week 3 game is against the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys did not start anybody in their first preseason game. Doesn't sound like they have any plans to start anybody notable throughout the preseason. So their third preseason game will be against a bunch of backups for the Cowboys. And it makes you wonder, is that enough for Geno Smith to lose the job and for Pete Carroll to go ahead and say, you know what, we'll go and give Drew Lock the starting job? The timing of this is significant considering that it happens now. The plan was always for Drew Lock to start the second preseason game, show what he can do, and maybe potentially take over the starting job. Now he's no longer there. He's not playing in this game. We'll see what that means. Obviously, Geno Smith still has to perform on Thursday night, but if he does, I think it's safe to say that he would have an edge here in this competition.
For sure. I think that Drew Lock, since he's younger, less experienced, maybe a little bit more skilled, he's viewed as the quarterback with a higher ceiling. I think that ceiling is relative when you're talking about this quarterback competition, but he's also probably got the much lower floor. I was talking to someone today who was saying that, it might kind of behoove the Seahawks to tank as much as possible this season, just based on the way their roster is constructed. The fact that, most likely Drew Lock and Geno Smith, neither one of those guys is going to be the quarterback of the future. We're looking at this roster right now, and they could have as many as 5 or 6 rookie starters on this team. Tariq Woolen and Kobe Bryant, they're at cornerback. Kenneth Walker at running back. I know he's dealing with some injuries right now, but he might eventually take over that starting job. Boy, and Maffei's going to have a role on third down. And it looks like both of their tackles are going to be rookies as well. So, Brad, I know that teams can't admit to tanking, otherwise they would get fined and some penalties would be levied. But in some ways, it does feel like losing is kind of the Seahawks' best option this season.
I mean, that's a good example there of, I always like to say, the coach and the players can't tank, nor do they want to, or are they incentivized to tank, especially players trying to earn money and maybe get a deal on a team that's actually, contending next year. But a front office can tank, right? You can maybe play a guy that is more volatile, and yeah, he might win you a game. He also might throw you out of a game and throw a couple picks, as opposed to a Geno Smith who maybe takes care of the football, like you said, lower ceiling, but also maybe a higher floor. That's a perfect example there. And you had your little, Brian Windhorst moment of wondering what was going on in Seattle when they put out the stats on the game they played against their own team. And then Drew Lock was taking over that position. And I do think, like you said, still on a rookie contract. You kind of know what Geno Smith is. He is a solid backup quarterback, but why not see what you have in Drew Lock? Like you said, playing behind 2 potentially starting rookie tackles and all these weapons. DK Metcalf just gets paid. Obviously, Drew Lock can throw the ball a country mile. It's unfortunate. This is very, very poor timing, kind of reminiscent last year of the Cam Newton situation in New England. Just not a good time for this to happen for Drew Lock if he wants to take that job and keep the reins.
Ari, one question on some of the COVID protocols. Do we know in season if teams have to announce positive COVID test? Because I know that there's been some rumblings here in New England that some players, some coaches who've missed some time have missed some time because of COVID, but they're not going to go out of their way to actually announce why those coaches or players are missing time. So do we know what this is going to look like in season, or are we just going to have to guess if a player is not at practice that it's going to wind up, if I know they'd be listed as illness on the injury report, but will we know anything more than that?
Right. Officially, it's really just self-reporting. Oh, I feel like I might have symptoms. Let me take a test. If it's positive, then the team would say, all right, he tested positive. But this actually happened in baseball recently with the Mets and their pitcher, Chris Bassett, where he tested positive for COVID. Being a team player, he decided to tell the team that he tested positive, but really had no symptoms. And he ended up being put on the COVID list, which took him out for a start. After he got back to the locker room, he announced that I literally had no symptoms. I was feeling fine. If this ever happens again, I'm not even telling anybody. I wonder if that's going to happen in the NFL. If players feel like, I'm feeling fine, nothing else is going on, I won't tell anybody, because the rules right now is nobody has to be tested. It's only if you feel like you might have something, tell someone or test yourself and let us know. So there is an avenue out of it, but if somebody does test positive, I think most teams will probably do the right thing. I think it's more up to the players to see if they will tell anybody if they're feeling something and if they're okay with taking basically a game away from the team.
I wrote about the Patriots on PFF.com on Monday this week. So I've been in New England for the Patriots Panthers joint practices. I was intending on paying a little bit more attention to the Panthers, but the big story of these 2 days have been all of the fights at practice. And it almost got out of control over the last couple of days, and something that you're certainly not used to seeing in New England, especially in a joint practice like this. Usually the players are very disciplined. And one thing that I did hear after the practice was that the Patriots thought that the Panthers were a little bit undisciplined during these practices, and then that might be what led to some of the fights. And one person said that they might not have a record reflective of their talent if they can't get that in order. But just to recap some of the things that have happened yesterday, I think there was 4 or 5 players ejected from practice. Patriots wide receiver Kendrick Bourne, Patriots wide receiver Christian Wilkerson, center James Ferentz, Kenny Robinson, who's a Panthers, safety and defensive tackle Phil Hoskins. Those were pretty much the garden variety fights that you see. Some of them built up a little bit more into kind of full team scrums, and the teams kind of had to get together and say, all right, we gotta, cut it out. Otherwise, this is not a productive environment. Today, things were going pretty well until a kickoff drill that was what they call just a thud drill, where, you don't bring a player down to the ground. They're in pads, they can hit, but once the hit has happened, then you lay off. But Christian Wilkerson, one of the players that was ejected from practice yesterday, was on the kickoff drill. Kenny Robinson, one of the Panthers players who was ejected yesterday, it gave him a blindside hit and actually knocked him unconscious, which was a really scary moment. Christian Wilkerson was down on the field. The trainers had to come out. He was carted off the field. He actually had to go to a medical facility after practice. We'll see what the update there is on that. But after that, Patriots special teams coach got involved, kind of got angry about the blindside hit. That started a big scrum of players on both sides. Kenny Robinson got ejected, came back on the field for some reason, then got ejected again. But almost immediately after that kickoff drill, the Panthers were on offense. Christian McCaffrey took a handoff. Dietrich Wise hit him down to the ground. Another fight ensued and actually spilled out into the front row of the stands. I think it was Dietrich Wise landed on a female fan. His helmet hit her foot. She declined medical coverage or anything like that. She's okay. But things got pretty out of control at these practices. Fortunately, after that, the two teams got together. They said, if this keeps on going, we'll have to cancel practice. You guys will only be practicing against yourselves. And it got cleaned up after that. But it was a pretty wild time here in New England. I know you see fights pretty often, but I guess my question to you, Ari, is what's your reaction to just that quote that, if they don't get things in order, then the Panthers might not be a team that plays to the level of their talent?
It's interesting because, I mean, we've heard so much about the Panthers this year, especially with just this coaching staff and how they're essentially entering a year which is pivotal for them, for their security. And if you're having this much trouble with discipline with your players, it's definitely a cause for concern. And usually these joint practices, a lot of teams like doing them because it's finally, we're not hitting our own players. We have different bodies, different colors around here, and it's beneficial for both sides. And a lot of teams, and we saw this with the Dolphins as well recently, they prefer to have all their starters doing joint practices instead of playing them in these preseason games where there is some concern for potential injury. And it's worked out for everybody. But the one potential problem that comes up is these fights, which usually happens, but it sounds like here with the Patriots and Panthers, it was much worse than usual compared to other times. The stuff usually happens in special team drills, from what I understand, especially because those are the guys that are really working the hardest to get those final roster spots. But goodness gracious, it sounded like it was really bad there in New England today. And for the most part, I think there is something there when it comes to this Panthers team and just being a disciplined team. And maybe that is one of the things that is going to be a problem for them come this year. And if it's a problem right now in joint practices, it makes you wonder how will it be once the season officially rolls around. Again, it's a pivotal year for everyone in that organization, from the coaching staff to the quarterbacks to a bunch of other players as well. So it's definitely one to monitor once the season starts, but it doesn't sound like a great day these last 2 days there in Foxborough.
Yeah, there was some other notable events out of Carolina. Robbie Anderson currently dealing with a quad injury. Terrace Marshall didn't practice with a hamstring injury. Matt Rule announced that Ike Mekwonu will be sticking at left tackle now for the rest of the season, but still no word on the starting quarterback. From my perspective, I didn't think either guy, Sam Darnold or Baker Mayfield, really stood out, but it sounded like a decision might be coming soon. Brad, what do you think just from the outside about the fact that this quarterback controversy is still ongoing? Do you feel like they should make a decision sooner than later on this, just so everyone knows where they're at?
I think it's probably the smart thing to do. I think we all probably agree Baker Mayfield is going to be the guy. And I think, like we saw last offseason, a little bit different situation, but the Jaguars playing games with Trevor Lawrence's reps and giving Gardner Minshew a bunch of first team reps. Yeah, it eventually matters. You need to develop chemistry. Mayfield came into this competition very late, and I think they do want him to be the guy. So if they're still trading days where Mayfield's with the ones and Darnold's with the ones, it's hampering his ability, especially when Robbie Anderson and Terrace Marshall are not on the field for some of those practices as well. So I think you do have to make a decision in the near future. I get you want the competition element. You want both guys, iron sharpens iron and all those catchphrases and whatnot. But eventually the cliches have to go away and you have to stick with the guy and stand behind him and get him ready for week one.
Yeah, I actually asked Baker Mayfield today where he thought the offense was, and he said that he wishes that they were a little bit further along. I said, what's holding you back? He said that we have to stop beating ourselves at times. And, I don't think this is necessarily what he meant, but you could look at that as, yeah, name a starting quarterback, like put me out there, stop messing around with the reps. Let's decide on a starting quarterback. Then maybe we can be a little bit further along. Once again, I don't think necessarily that's what he meant, but I think that that's one way that, that statement can kind of be interpreted a little bit. Let's talk about quarterbacks some more. There was a report, I think it was Ian Rapport of NFL Media, said the Ravens are willing to pay Lamar Jackson a bigger contract than Kyler Murray. That's definitely not surprising on my end. I was talking to someone this week who said that they expected Lamar Jackson to get a contract north of $46 million per year. And I was talking to that person because I was actually asking about Patrick Mahomes, because Patrick Mahomes signed a 10-year deal 2 years ago that's kind of fallen behind the quarterback market now a little bit. He's making $45 million a year. These quarterbacks now, Kyler Murray, Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, all now have made north of that APY. And he was mentioning, too, that you could see 4 or 5 more quarterbacks over the next year continue to sign deals that are $46 million or above. Russell Wilson only has 2 years left on his deal. He's only making $35 million per year. Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson was one of those guys. Even Tom Brady's only making $25 million. He's going to be a free agent. Tua Tagovailoa's contract is coming up. There's a lot of these quarterbacks where at some point, if you've got 8 or 9 guys making more than Patrick Mahomes, he thought that Patrick Mahomes' contract would then probably be adjusted to get him back up to that market. But Ari, what was your reaction to the fact that Lamar Jackson probably going to make more than Kyler Murray?
That should be a given. I mean, first of all, just considering where both players are in their contracts, Kyler just finished his third year. Lamar just finished his fourth and is entering his fifth and final one. So that's part of it where obviously he should be getting more, not just because of his play, but where he is right now in the contract. But Lamar actually just put a timetable on the Ravens to get this done. He wants it done before week 1 of this regular season, or else we are done talking until next offseason, when they will be forced to use the franchise tag most likely next year. And it's an interesting situation. We've talked about it a few times. There is no agent in the middle. There is that Deshaun Watson contract, which APY wise does not reach what Kyler Murray did, but obviously the guarantees are all fully guaranteed. And it makes you wonder if that is what Lamar wants to reach, somewhere in that territory, because we've mentioned this before, but when the Deshaun Watson contract happened, many owners were not happy with the Haslams. Only one owner came out publicly and said publicly that he was not happy with it, and that was Stephen Bisciotti, the Ravens owner. So I'm curious to know, where is Lamar Jackson when it comes to these talks? How much money does he want fully guaranteed? And I feel like he's might be okay going to the franchise tag game and saying, you know what, if you're not willing to meet my price, I'll play this year. Have a great year. Joe Flacco did this with the Ravens once upon a time. They couldn't get a deal done. Eventually, he won the Super Bowl, was Super Bowl MVP, and he completely blew up the quarterback market. Could Lamar do that? Maybe. Will it bite the Ravens again? Possibly. But if they're able to get a Super Bowl, I guess none of that matters. But point is, I think Lamar would be okay with doing that scenario if the Ravens are not okay with meeting his price. And the clock is ticking. I mean, the opener for the Ravens is September 11th against the Jets. I'm guessing that deadline is September 10th. And if no deal is reached, he's perfectly fine with waiting another year.
Brett, I was going to ask you about Patrick Mahomes, but just to that point on Lamar Jackson, I mean, why would he be okay with that? Why would he be okay with kind of playing this year to year if the other option is to be making $47 million per year? I mean, I don't know what his other option is other than to continue to play this out, but that doesn't seem like an overly attractive option compared to, I guess, I don't know. It's a tough situation for Lamar Jackson right now.
Yeah, there's undoubtedly risk reward, but I think you would point to something like a Dak Prescott situation in Dallas. And let's hypothetically say, instead of getting injured in his franchise tag year, but actually had a monster season, he's probably making even more than $40 million per year. So I think the calculation for Lamar Jackson is if I play out this year, play very well, I'm passing Aaron Rodgers. I'm maybe even waiting for guys like Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow to go before me, and I'll get $55-60 million a year. So I think the interesting thing about the Deshaun Watson point as well, and I'll tie it to Mahomes also. I think that probably the biggest catalyst for Mahomes wanting a new deal is the fact that Watson's in his draft class and now makes more than him. But the thing with Lamar Jackson and owner Steve Bisciotti, when we talked about the deal, the Ravens have had a recent trend. Actually wrote an article about this at PFF.com. They've been giving very strong guarantees on their contracts, and in return, lowering the total value of the player deals. You look at Marlon Humphrey, Ronnie Stanley, Mark Andrews, Marcus Williams, go down the list of their highly paid guys. The total value is lower, but then the guarantees are in line with the top of the market. And so I think for Lamar Jackson, he's probably saying, not only am I going to surpass Kyler Murray, but I still want, of the $47 million per year, 80, 85, maybe even 90% of that deal fully guaranteed. Maybe not the full Deshaun Watson treatment, but close to it. And I think that's probably the biggest holdup, is they're trying to find a middle ground between how strong are the guarantees and how much money you're going to get. But, his patience could pay off, no question.
There's also an element here, and I know this is a bit off topic a little bit, but somebody floated this idea to me about Lamar, that he believes that the salary cap might be going up really high soon. And would he consider, since he doesn't have an agent, and agents have failed in doing this, but to tie his next deal into the salary cap, that if the salary cap does go up, my contract will reflect how much the salary cap is going up. No quarterback has done this. People thought Patrick Mahomes would do it, especially since he did a 10-year a 10-year deal, but he didn't. But people have wondered maybe if Lamar Jackson would want to do that. I don't think the Ravens will ever go there, but he doesn't have an agent. He's doing this very differently than anybody else. It's a very unique situation. I thought about if he might be looking to do that. I know nobody really knows exactly what's going on in Baltimore. They're very close to the vest with what's going on. There is no agent here, but at least there's one thing to think about if Lamar might be considering doing that. I don't think the Ravens will ever do it, but is that part of his thinking as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's relevant always. Russell Wilson, sorry to cut you off, Doug. Russell Wilson tried to do that in Seattle when he got his extension. They wouldn't go for it, kind of a different sport. But LeBron James, his extension today that was announced has a stipulation that if the cap jumps that his deal will make more money. So I think that, hey, if that's what Lamar is trying to pull off, kudos to him because that's, it's the holy grail, frankly, for the next frontier of quarterback contracts.
Just real quick, Brad, on the Mahomes situation. He signs a 10-year contract 2 years ago, like I mentioned. And essentially the way it was described to me is that they never thought that this contract would go untouched over the course of the 10 years. That at some point it would be tweaked or sweetened. At that point, what's the point in signing a 10-year contract if it's just going to wind up being, restructured or if he's going to get that contract sweetened anyway?
It's a phenomenal question. And if you actually break the deal down, the first 5 years of the deal were about $39.5 million, and the final 5 years about $50.5 million. And I mentioned Deshaun Watson signed for $39 million per year just before him, so kind of lines up with how it was structured. But yeah, I mean, the incentive is the team can keep restructuring the deal and pushing cap hits down the line, and they get all this flexibility. And that, yes, you assume it's going to get touched, but maybe he comes to you and you say, hey, look, Patrick, you have 7 years left on your deal. We don't really feel like doing anything. Is he really going to sit out, or can you convince him just one more offseason to wait? But I am in no way, shape, or form surprised that deal might get readjusted soon. It is too good of a value for the team already at this point.
Yeah, and one thing that was mentioned to me was that the Chiefs have just taken money from the back end of Travis Kelce's deal, moved it up into this year. Perhaps at some point, whether it's next year, the year after, whatever it would be, something similar could potentially happen with Patrick Mahomes as well, since it is so backloaded. And then basically they could figure out the backloaded portion when it comes down to that. Let's talk real quickly about some trade candidates. Brad, you wrote about top trade candidates around the NFL. Who's one guy that you were really high on that you wanted to highlight from that article?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should talk about him because there's obviously some more news and developments even in this case with his financial advisor, St. Omni. I'm talking, of course, about Roquan Smith, the Chicago Bears linebacker. Story came out that the NFL Management Council released a statement to all 32 clubs, or I guess 31 clubs, not the Chicago Bears, that if they get a phone call from someone named St. Omni who's holding himself out as the representation for Roquan Smith, that they cannot speak with him. It's twofold. A, he's not an agent, so you can't call clubs and speak on behalf of a player. But secondly, if folks don't know, when you get to the point where the team grants an agent permission to call clubs on his own behalf and make deals, the team has to submit that in writing and say, we are giving this NFLPA certified agent permission to go out and speak to clubs. So that was the latest saga, or the latest part of the saga in the Roquan Smith situation. I still do think a deal probably gets done, but look, him having, he probably had a say in those phone calls being made. And so maybe we are trending more and more towards a deal getting done.
Yeah, it does seem like things are kind of coming to a head right there. I'm curious about the Patriots wide receiver situation. I had reported that there's probably going to be an odd man out in that wide receiver group since they've got Devontae Parker, Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne, and Jacoby Myers. That's 4 guys that you're paying a lot of money. They just drafted Tyquan Thornton in the second round, and he's starting to emerge a little bit this summer as well. So if they want to get him playing time, they're probably going to have to get one of those guys out. At the time, I was told that Nelson Aguilar probably would wind up being that odd man out. Based on his contract, the fact that he's going to have a cap at $15 million, the fact that trading him could free up $9 million, cutting him could free up $5 million, he was kind of the obvious odd man out to one person that I was talking to. But since that time, Kendrick Bourne has actually kind of fallen down the depth chart a little bit. He got kicked out of practice yesterday, and then today he wasn't part of that first group of wide receivers. He was kind of part of that second group of wide receivers. I've heard that the Patriots have actually received trade offers for Kendrick Bourne that they've turned down. But talk about movable wide receiver contracts. Kendrick Bourne is a starting caliber wide receiver who's making $5 million a year. If I'm the Patriots, I don't want to touch that. I don't want to move him. And I can certainly understand why teams might be interested in him. So just something to monitor. I don't think he winds up getting traded. I think the Patriots definitely have plans for him. But it's been kind of an interesting development over the last couple of days for Kendrick Bourne. Ari, any trade candidates that you're monitoring?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen a number of trades here coming down the last couple of days. We'll probably see a handful of more here before rosters trim down to 80 and eventually to 53. We had Tyree Gillespie, a fourth-round pick of the Raiders last year, got traded yesterday to the Titans for a conditional seventh-round pick. We'll see more of those trades going down. I'm keeping an eye on the wide receiver market. We had JJ Arcega-Whiteside traded the other day. Brad mentioned Darius Slayton in the article, Denzel Mims in the article, the two Miami receivers we've mentioned here with Lynn Bowden and Preston Williams. Those type of guys who are on the bottom of the depth chart, probably on the roster bubble. There are teams who could use some receiver help. There are receivers who could use a fresh start. Keep an eye on all those guys here, especially now with the second preseason game. I think teams will want to put them on the field, showcase them to the rest of the league. And we might have some deals go down here next week before the third preseason game and before the rosters officially trim down to 53.
Let's talk about Hard Knocks. Hard Knocks, second episode aired on Tuesday night. I said it last week, Hard Knocks is back. Like, there's something about this season that is just so much entertaining than some of the last few ones. I think it boils down to the characters where, Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think, was the highlight for me last night, where he's such a serious guy. He can name every single wide receiver that was taking it before him in last year's draft. He was a phenomenal rookie wide receiver for the Lions. And just watching some of the training montages that he has with his father, John Brown, former Mr. Universe, you can understand where he got this work ethic from. And it's kind of amazing that he wasn't better at USC and they didn't actually wind up getting drafted higher when he was coming out of USC. But yeah, I think that he was the highlight for me. And it was also just Dan Campbell, he'll drop 7 F-bombs in one sentence. And it's just it's so funny to hear. He's just such a character. But Ari, was there one particular point of Hard Knocks that stuck out to you?
Amon-Ra St. Brown definitely was one of them for me. The other one is Malcolm Rodriguez, or Rodrigo, getting a lot of spotlight on Hard Knocks last night, a 6th-round linebacker who it appears like is blowing the coaches away and the entire staff there of his play on the defensive side. He's been getting first-team reps out there as a 6th-round pick, a little bit undersized at 5'11", but he's making plays out there. Kelvin Shepard, their linebackers coach, who is full of energy, one of my favorite guys here as well throughout this episode, was hyping him up to the entire linebackers room, basically using Malcolm Rodriguez as an example as who he wants all these other linebackers to be. I'm impressed by the guy. I'm really curious to see how he does moving forward. I know, Doug, you tweeted you want to know his defensive rookie of the year odds. Let me know if you found them or not, but whatever the case is, a 6th-round pick. We talk a lot about Brad Holmes and his ability to draft. It looks like he might have found another nice building block for the future here with Rodrigo.
Right, I know you're out in California right now. I'm not sure if you were able to catch Hard Knocks, but if you did you have a favorite moment?
No, I'm still traveling. I'm actually in Chicago now, so I'm back on the Midwest.
There we go.
Yeah, I'm all over the place. It's where's Waldo with me these days? But I did catch it. I think we mentioned it a couple times. I think having a coaching staff of full former players is awesome, and I think players do love it 99.99% of the time. Where I think sometimes they maybe don't love it is every guy on the staff, I think you could argue, played longer than their physical gifts and abilities really said they should. And Deuce Staley, maybe at the top of that list, played for, I want to say, 12 or 15 years, had a super long career. And I think anytime DeAndre Swift has an excuse or has a reason not to go 110% balls to the wall on every single rep of every single practice, Deuce is going to let him hear it. He's going to let him hear it and let him know there are 0 excuses here. I want you to be the best you can possibly be. And Swift is a phenomenal prospect, even all the way back to his high school days. So I thought there were some interesting scenes there. I think he was a little tired of hearing from Deuce. But yeah, this coaching staff is so much fun because it's a bunch of guys that came in the league and just refused to leave.
I'm interested to know what percentage of those meetings is just filled with those glory days stories of Dan Campbell recounting, the preseason game where he had to strap the shoelaces back on because there were so many injuries at tight end. I feel like every meeting is just those stories over and over again from these players playing time, but certainly seems like a great environment there in Detroit. Excited to see how they fare during the 2022 season. But this was another fun episode. Thanks for joining us. Keep it on pff.com for all of your news and analysis. Follow Ari on Twitter at MySportsUpdate. Follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Follow me, if I can learn how to talk, at Doug Kyed. And we will be back with you guys again next week, unless something crazy happens. And it does seem like we're probably anticipating some sort of news about Deshaun Watson fairly soon. So maybe we will see you guys again at some point this week.